On this episode of Totally Classic, I picked a subject this week, and Andy and I had been talking about different explorations in the field of what we were looking at was science and spirituality. And I was like, ooh, that's an interesting confluence. And was sort of responding to some of the stuff that Andy was sharing. And then I realized part of the way through that we had yet another. And I know for people who listen to this podcast a lot, you're like, oh gosh, here we go again. Another semantic issue. Because I was looking at it and being like, I was like, I don't understand how this is about spirituality. And then I was like, all right, well, what about the science part? Oh, I don't really understand how this is about science. Oh no, this must be one of those circumstances where these two words mean something different than like when I go look up the words in a dictionary. Because if I don't know what a word means, I go look it up in the OED and Oxford Learners, and then I cross-reference with Cambridge. Or that's just how I. If I don't understand what the word means, I don't tend to, and I think other people do this, and maybe I'm coming to a realization right now. They might say, ask the person, what does blah 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 mean? I don't do that because I'm not really interested. I know how often, being a word lover, people misuse words or they're using them in a slang fashion, and I want to know what the word actually means to know whether their slang fashion word is applicable. But I realize from a more relational centric point of view, some people might save themselves some trouble by just saying, instead of what does blank mean, what do you mean by blank? Ooh. You know what? This episode has been brought to you by. My name is Brendan McNamara.
And I am Andy Swindler.
And this is Totally Classic, where we talk about all the things that people say you shouldn't talk about because you're going to fight, or you're a fascist if you think the other thing, you're a Nazi, whatever, all that sort of stuff. Any Godwin's Law breaking conversations. Let's just talk about those things. Let's talk about the people we love and trust. Let's explore with curiosity, holding our perspective. So, maybe with three fingers solid, two fingers loose, like Book of Five Rings. And today's subject is, can anyone be spiritual without religion?
Throwing it
What's your
down.
Yep. What's your pre-vote, Andy? I think we have
Uh,
opposite pre-votes on this one, if I were to guess.
yeah. I think your guess is right. I'm a thumbs up.
And I'm a thumbs down on it. Although it is honestly, it's a phrase I've heard. I mean, it's almost a joke at this. It's probably actually been a joke for about 15 to 20 years. The I'm spiritual, just not religious I've literally heard that confessed from the mouths of human beings standing or sitting in front of me in real life, easily probably two or three hundred times. So it is popular as a claim for sure. So I don't want anyone to think that like nobody says that. That's not what I mean by is something true or is something so. That's people claiming something is really has very little to do with ontology, unless we're talking about linguistics, because that's how linguistics functions. Is what does the word mean when people say it the most? Um, but your immediate is a is an upvote yes. My immediate upvote no, which puts us at polar opposite ends. Where succinctly, let me try to say it succinctly. You don't have to answer succinctly. Like, where do you already assume our disconnect is? Like, why would we start probably from opposite
Hmm.
thumbings?
Well, I'm reminding myself of an episode we did quite a while ago, and our question was, is sex sacred?
Mm,
I think the closest we'd probably come to this. And I've been really,
yeah,
I don't know, if toiling is the right word, but really exploring these words lately. Spirituality, sacred, divine, throw science in there, just to add some spice. Uh, Love is, I think, an ingredient. These are some of the words that I relate, and
yeah.
I'm sure I'm one of those people who has said I'm spiritual but not religious. I don't say that anymore. It doesn't seem worth pointing out. Um,
Mm,
I don't. Yeah, I mean, it's true. I don't like adhere to a religion. We've certainly talked about that. Uh, I wasn't raised in a particular religion or church, but I was exposed to many. And so I don't know if that had something to do with it in terms of my own
mm.
upbringing. So there's not that like tradition or lineage. Um, In some ways, it reminds me a little of like how meditation, I think, extracted some of the principles from Buddhism, or not just meditation, but mindfulness more generally. Um,
Hmm.
Extracted some of the principles, but it kind of separated it from the religion itself and the rest of it.
Yes.
Um, so I guess my hunch is that there's two options coming up. One is that it's purely a linguistic matter because we
Hmm.
so often talk about that. Just what is the actual dictionary definition of the term spiritual, and that it's
Yeah.
implicitly connected to religion, um, or
Yeah. Yeah.
explicitly, I should say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Well,
the
wait.
other the other might
Go.
just
Go
be
ahead. Go ahead.
your own lived experience as a really devout Christian, um, and that it's I don't know that it requires like a following of a great path, if I could use that terminology, of a
Yeah. Yeah.
well-established path to connect with spirit in that way.
Yeah.
That's what's
Yeah.
coming up.
So let me just read. So what I tend to do uh, for analyzing any question is go, oh, okay, I probably have my intuitive response, which is tied up to my like previous apprehension. So I always try to set that to the side and go, okay, well, wait, I might think these words mean these things, but let me look them up. So I just did a quick, literally just on my phone right now, religion. So you said this is maybe the best place to start because we can make it personal, which we don't often do. So you were saying you would have claimed that previously. You probably don't say it now because you don't feel like the distinction needs to be made. But do you feel like it's an accurate statement? Like if someone were to say that about you when you weren't there, like let's say this is like your
Yeah, that's what I was
grandma.
saying. Well, it
Yeah,
is. I am spiritual. I am not religious.
got you.
Those are true
So
statements. I don't
yeah,
necessarily feel the need to connect them because that sort of overly draws a contrast. Like I don't have to define being spiritual as being not religious, if that makes sense.
got you. So I just did the I didn't even do a hard deep search or whatever or pick on religion. So you would say you don't adhere to a religion, right?
Yes, an organized
Right.
religion. Yeah.
Um, so a religion so it says, like, for example, the number one definition of religion, the belief in and reverence for a supernatural power or powers regarding as creating and governing the universe. So you don't there you would just say that you don't believe in a supernatural power or powers creating and governing the universe.
I'm uh we could have a discussion about creating uh governing. I could go for governing.
Okay.
This is interesting right off the bat, which is I'm sure why you went there, because I associate religion with let's say the religious brand, if you will. Uh,
Yeah.
and
Which we
that's why I
and
think
it
I corrected it to organized religion, because
yeah.
but then you would say the progressives are a reasonably organized religion, so I don't know.
Anything is organized, right? I mean, unless you
Right.
literally and well, I would honestly say like any isn't my assumption then actually even like probably overarching is like there is no such thing as spirituality without religion. Just briefly, a because the consensus of experts on spirituality rejects such a premise. It's rejected by all, probably 95 to 98% of all spiritual pursuits in human history. Actually, across human history, probably closer to 99, including almost all indigenous religions, would say without organizing principles, you're just like at best in like an animistic, some indigenous religions would be like sort of all things are spiritual, but things that are disordered, that is outside of order, are essentially what we would call evil or even like malicious, that is like dark spirits like that spirits that have to be like gotten out of you. So the idea of removing any organization, I do think is very accurate, like what would probably be maybe even what's claimed here as spirituality. So it's the idea of metaphysics without boundary, except the boundary that the individual had. Like it's almost pure individualism, sort of individualism, religion, maybe, or something. But religion, like, really just then belief and reverence for, that means any sort of metaphysical, like supernatural, non-tangible, immaterial thing. And religion can also be a particular variety, but that's just meaning that would be like the Christian religion or secular religion or atheistic religion. Well, atheism in strict sense obviously would reject Christianity, it would reject the New Age. Any of this stuff is hokum. It's all equally hokum, right? Like the Ricky Gervaises of the world, right? Or the Christopher Hitchens, like New Age, Christianity, Buddhism. What do you mean? It's all complete hogwash, pure empiricism. We exist as material creatures. We go into dirt. We are no more. You know, that sort of premise. So really, that's as near as I can tell. At least the binary is religious, non-religious. But non-religious is functionally, that means there is no non-material force. Do you think that's pretty fair? At least in terms of, maybe that's not how the term is used in cohort that you're describing, but would that be a fair apprehension of like the terminology as that word exists, generally speaking?
Yeah, it's so many of our conversations reveal my bubbles, and I have to say that for me, I'll speak for myself,
Yeah,
and that obviously has to come from my surroundings to some extent. Religion is always associated with a specific branch, tradition, practice,
right. So
and
mindful,
in
like
many ways, it's
mindfulness. Yeah.
it's held as like derogatory. No, I don't mean. I mean like what's a better way to put this? Like, let's say Christianity, Hindu, Baha'i, perhaps being the newest sort of official brand of religion. Um,
Or you just mean like, I guess that would be like, a lot of people refer to them as the major religions.
the major religions. There you go. Thanks. Let's just use that term so we
So
can
you're
help.
not made. So you are. So that's, well, that's what I mean though. So if anyone says I'm spiritual, not religious, they're making, I think, to me it's like a Buddhist koan, where it's like I am here, I am not here. You know what I mean? You're saying something that's nonsensical, but you're doing it in a provocative, fun way. Because let's even again, Britannica, religion, human beings' relation to that which they regard as holy, sacred, absolute, spiritual, divine, or worthy of a special reverence. Britannica is a pretty neutral source. I find them even slightly, sort of like slightly progressively biased over time. Um, so that would mean if you're spiritual, you're saying I'm spiritual, but I have no relation to anything as holy, sacred, absolute, spiritual, divine, or worthy of a special reverence. That would seem to be contradictory in and of itself as a statement. Like, and if you just said that generically to anyone else, it would be normal, right? At the very least, to be like, someone's immediate response probably be like, that's not true. Because it, like, or at the very least, you have to go. And this is what I've done. I couldn't even tell you how many times in Los Angeles. I'm like, what in the world do you mean by that? Like what? Like seriously, what are you talking about? I probably could have said it nicer, but I was just like, I don't. This what you just said is hilarious. And I would even say it's actually quite unusual, meaning it's contrary to like all systems. Like even like you were saying, my sense is that the idea of spiritual and not religious is purely colonialism,
Mm.
meaning it's invented by literally, right? The transcendentalists had copies of the Bhagavad Gita. They read it in English, not ever talking to anyone, and they said, "Oh my gosh, look, we've discovered truths in here that the practitioners never really understood." And then that got, and that to me, that's probably really where it started and unfolded from there, which is like yoga. Yoga is not a worship practice. Yoga's just, they just didn't know. They'd accidentally stumbled upon this amazing technology. I mean, this is cultural, essentially it's cultural appropriation of the most important ways, determiners of ways of life of various and sundry people groups. And my
It's like how
theory
we
is,
invented farming when we took the natives' lands. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, you're like, oh my gosh, Look at let's maybe we rotate our crops. Look at these foolish savages really figured
That's so
something
funny.
out.
They put rivers in these little trenches. Like
Yeah,
we
that's
could we
was
could call that irrigation. Yeah.
I know. Gosh, I guess that's just where the pigs will let the pigs wallow. So yeah, it seems like that. So then spiritual. So then I guess my question is, well, wait. So then what? And yes, let me speak to the bias. I'm a Christian. Yes, Christianity probably more strongly than most other like major religions. Uh, a primary tenet of Christianity is all human beings are conceived and born spiritually dead, that there is no spiritual life. And this relates to Judaism, relates to Islam. Spirit in the Old Testament in Judaism is ruach, which just means breath of God, which means the only spiritual thing coming in and out of us is that which is supplied from external, and then we breathe it out. We breathe it in, we breathe it out. It doesn't make us spiritual beings because without it's just like if you put a human being in space, we're we are oxygen breathing, but we're not breathing oxygen. So it's not fun. Like we don't have the capacity in and of ourselves to do anything with this. Um, so then I have that bias, and then I go, okay, well, wait, that's probably my Christian bias. And then I look at just neutral sources, and they tell me, oh, yeah, it's also impossible there. So it's kind of one of those things where then I'm like, I probably should have done the thing I started at this beginning of the episode. Wait, what do you mean by those two terms? And are you accurate in using those words to say the terms that you mean?
Well, I may have found a clue in Wikipedia
Yep.
um, as one source. Uh, Not too far down. It says religions have sacred histories, narratives, and mythologies preserved in oral traditions, sacred texts, symbols, and holy places that may attempt to explain the origin of life, the universe, or the phenomena. Religious practice may include rituals, sermons, commemoration or veneration, sacrifices, festivals, feasts, trances, initiations, etc., etc. So I think that's part of the association is like there's a I'm just going to keep calling it a brand, and I hope that's not derogatory, but that's sort of adjacent to how we think about a lot of things in our conversations
Yep.
um, of these major religions, where it's a set of certainly principles, commandments, etc., um, a sacred text, rituals, practices, certain types of buildings, ways you do things. I think that's part of the resistance is that it's like, oh, it has to look a certain way. Like my relationship with God, let's say, has to look a certain way. And the only way within this system to achieve that relationship is to practice this certain way, which
But isn't aren't you just you're just picking a different way and doing different rituals and different practices in different buildings with different words and different oral traditions at the minimum, if
but
not
they're not
more.
necessarily as I guess organized, although that's funny because what are there 1600 at least denominations of Christianity? So,
Yeah.
we do even within one major religion or brand, we obviously have a sense of, hey, we want to do things a little differently, which I think is
Yeah.
good. That's part of uh, the human spirit, right? We want to localize things, we want to customize
Yeah.
things, maybe optimize things. So it's like an extreme version of that, as I see it, as this idea of spirituality, because it's not necessarily connected to those things. You don't necessarily go to a building with people, which is for a long time. I used to be more critical of the major religions. I'm less now. But for forever, I don't think I've ever lost sight of the value of community, of going
Hmm.
to a place to worship, to be with people, to take care of the community, to be in fellowship. I mean, that is all incredibly valuable. And I do think that is something that's lost with those of us who are just like, hey, you know what? I'm gonna work on my own relationship with spirit and not do that in community.
Hmm. But what you're talking about is also contained in that entire system, meaning every major religion has also people who isolate and do kind of ascertain their same thing. Meaning, it doesn't have to contain, even in the description you were reading, it doesn't have to contain all those elements. It could be any of those, one of those, three of those. So as long as you have any, if you just wake up every morning, walk outside, sit in the grass, pick up a rock and rub it in your hand, and then try to ascertain or connect to whatever you consider a transcendent source, that fulfills the entirety of what religion is, even by Wikipedia standards, because there's a ritual, there's an oral tradition, because either you heard that from someone, got it from somewhere, read it somewhere, or extrapolated that version of it from something else you read. Someone else's, like mindfulness is a religious practice because it has a name, it has a brand, it is a continued ritual. The only element it gets to, so at the very least, it's all religious, right? I mean, how is it? It's not major religion. You'd be like, I'm spiritual, but I'm not a part of one of the major religions. But you're like, I don't even think people think about religions that way necessarily. Maybe some people do. So then
Well,
the
for
question,
instance, I'm trained in a methodology called true purpose, and the idea of that is it's actually, yeah, it's using a methodology that was generated by a psychologist, Carl Jung, which is incredibly simple. It just looks like ends up looking like you're writing a screenplay with yourself. It's called active imagination dialogue.
yeah.
And you can use it. I do use it to connect with a transcendent entity and have conversations. And this is becoming more popular. It's like conversations with God. There's all kinds of stuff out there now. And that's been, let's just say that's a question I've held for quite some time is when in religion is that relationship with God sort of mediated by somebody standing at the front of the room, uh, versus me having it directly? When is that limited, perhaps, by sacred texts that I think are I'm game for anything that's a contemplative source, an exercise, and yet I think the greater power is a direct connection, a direct conversation, and that's what I practice. And so in that, that's not that's not defined by any strict practice. That's just
Well, but
a
that's, but
simple.
you can't, right, but you can't put strict into religion because it's not in the thing that you read. Meaning, like, strict adherence of a religion is not
Okay,
religion.
strike
You
strict
know what I'm
from
saying?
the rule,
Yeah.
but this
Yeah.
certainly says it implies, if not outright says, it's speaking to all these ways of doing things that already exist. And in this way, other than using a simple dialogue practice, which is about as basic as it gets, like back and forth, there's
Yeah.
nothing else. There's no there's no specific ritual, you know, and it's a means by which to have that direct connection. And, we often use the word download, right? Download new information, download my own practices. So
Yeah.
yeah,
But
you could
then
argue, you could
it should
argue
be,
that that's just
it's
my
just,
mind, compiling that from stuff I've read, I guess, but
well,
that's
it's
not what
just,
I'm doing.
it's your own religion, because a religion wasn't not a religion when only one person practiced it. You know what I'm saying? Like when literally, let's say it was just, now Buddha, of course, was out of Hinduism, but like, let's say it was just Buddha by himself. It wasn't not a religion when he was just sitting under a tree. It, it's, it's just Buddhism. That just means multiple people practice the religion that the one person was doing by themselves.
Well, that's maybe why the word brand is actually important. Is I think that's true. I think a lot of times prophets were just doing their thing, and then later on, people, you know, gathered it all up and made a book. And
Yeah.
I once I was heard a keynote once in a publishing conference. He said the Bible was the first and greatest form of content marketing. I was like, well, that's a provocative thing to say.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Put it all together. Well, that's, I mean, yeah, obviously, yeah, the Bible is an example of seeking unity across multiple sources, which is very similar to like a whatever
I'm into that.
a pantheistic exploration. Um, but what I'm saying is like all of those, again, religion, even from Wikipedia, which is, we all know, like whatever, even grade school children aren't allowed to quote Wikipedia, but even that wasn't saying anything different than what like American Heritage or uh, whatever Merriam Britannica was saying. It's a set of beliefs. So anybody who has a set of beliefs regarding, like, if you're connecting to a source or whatever, right? Something spiritual, divine, absolute, holy, sacred, worthy of a special reference. I mean, everything you're describing sounds like you're talking about a human relation to that which is worthy of a special reverence, as manifest in literal practices and rituals, as you just described, your like writing ritual. So that would, at least externally speaking, that would fulfill. And then if you occasionally go to people with it, and you occasionally go to buildings where people are talking about it or doing it, I mean, at that point, it satisfies not only the basic definition, but it actually satisfies the manifestations thereof. Meaning, if nothing else, maybe at least I was saying spirituality, I think, is where we're going to have the hardest time agreeing. But religious, I was like, it is, at least that's religion. I mean, I guess you're like, how is that not? It's not a major religion, but major doesn't. We would never let, right? Even you and I would never let major religion define what a religion is. You're like, that's just, those are just the most popular ones, but it doesn't make them most popular. Doesn't mean only, right? Coke and Pepsi aren't the only sodas. I love me some, cream soda, some Moxie cream soda, only available regionally.
Well, so if we keep reading in Britannica, it says believers and
Yep.
worshippers participate in and are often enjoined to perform devotional or contemplative practices, such as prayer, meditation, or particular rituals. Particular rituals. Worship, moral conduct, right belief, and participation in religious institutions are among the constituent elements of the religious life.
Yep. So
So,
if anything like prayer, such as prayer, so anything prayer like, anything meditative, writing back and forth to yourself would be meditative,
so
prayerful, right? And a
yeah,
particular
and
ritual.
I like this word contemplative practices.
Yep.
That's a word I think is a reasonable roundup of
Yeah.
all of that stuff, you know.
And it depends what you're contemplating, right? Whether you're contemplating yourself, the divine, blah blah blah, right? Although I think within your system, I could be wrong. Like the yours is probably more similar to like an animistic religion, meaning the self and the divine are kind of, and creation or whatever, all intermingled kind of parts of the whole in a way. Is that kind of a broadly accurate?
Um,
Oh, I just
yeah,
mean
like
in your
it's a
practice. Yeah,
oneness. It's a Sufi. I think I identify, yes, the brand I identify most closely with is Sufi. So it's a
gotcha.
oneness, the idea of oneness.
And is oneness innate in that sense? Meaning, in Islam, Sufi is like the mystical branch of Islam, much like sort of whatever mystic or Gnostic traditions in Christianity are offshoots of Christianity. So Sufi is Muslim. It's a Muslim belief, and Muslims, similar to, at least in the basic sense, similar to Jews, even more so than Christians. Like humanity is not, cannot by themselves access or have no relation. There is no relationship with the divine, like especially in Islam, it's more like through the mediation of sort of the wisdom and teachings of Muhammad, um, but really except by Allah. And then obviously like Judaism, it's really only accessible to Jews, and even those, only those Jews who are obedient have any access to God. But it's not internal; it's external, much like wisdom throughout the ancient world was always like logos, and for the Greeks or whatever. Greeks weren't like, we don't know within ourselves what is true. What is true exists, and we can apprehend that which exists outside of ourselves. So in Sufi, I don't know very much about Sufism though. So like, how does Sufism diverge from Islam in terms of divinity? Meaning oneness is possible in Christianity, oneness is possible in Islam, but it's not inherent. Like you don't you aren't naturally one.
Yeah.
Meaning like
Well, the way I
that's
learned it is that
yeah.
there's four layers of the heart, and the deepest
Hmm.
layer is the layer of oneness. It's the layer of the divine. There's 99 divine qualities, and it's things that you know, I think poets even more than philosophers get closer to putting language to because, yeah, I am not qualified to do better than those who named 99 divine qualities in terms of speaking to the Sufi beliefs. Um, but it is interesting because that is a contrast. I personally uh, believe we are connected to the divine. we're born into it. So
Mm.
this idea that it's exclusive to certain people or certain practices or that we have to do it a certain way, I think that's part of my resistance, if I heard that in any way accurately.
Well, yeah, just Sufism, according to Britannica, it's the beliefs in which Muslims, so you have to be Muslim, you can't be a non-Muslim, seek to find the truth of divine love and knowledge. This would be Allah's love, not generic divine. Divine love and knowledge through direct personal experience of God, or in their case, specifically Allah, the God Allah, the supreme God, God Allah. It consists of a variety of mystical passages designed to ascertain the nature of humanity and of God and to facilitate the experience of the presence of divine love and wisdom in the world. Meaning, that is not human divine love. That is, it's literally, it's in order to pursue and ascertain and in some ways grant access or earn access. I don't know. I don't know enough about it of oneself to God, divine source. But divine source is not inner. It's much. It's like like I was saying. This is kind of like Judaistic, meaning you have to take in divinity from outside yourself into yourself in order to inform yourself how to access divinity. But there's no innate divinity within Sufi or whatever. So would you just say you're not Sufi in that sense? You just meant it in like there are some aspects of Sufism that you consider
Yeah, no, I
divine.
don't claim to be Sufi. I learned
Okay,
from a
okay.
Sufi teacher,
Yeah.
and that's the one that resonated the closest. But that's why I don't really subscribe to any of the major religions because none of them. I've spent probably the most time actually. I happen to live near the Baha'i temple.
Yeah.
We never went in there when we were in college, which was funny to me. It's really quite beautiful.
Yeah,
And
yeah, they
there's
must be
things
nice.
I like about the idea of it, especially as an Enneagram 9, um, because it's like the Enneagram 9 of religions. It's like, oh, let's take nine other religions and sort of um, find the common ground. And
Yeah.
and so that might lead us to, unless we're like, I don't mean to abandon any of the other discussion, but the word love comes up a lot in religion. And to me, that's quite important because that's really what's at the essence of both any of these ideas, I think, if they're true. And you read a poem I wrote called "Love Is at My Wedding," which I really loved.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, which is funny because I think I don't necessarily because I've talked about love so much, but I think a lot of people associate love with Christianity specifically. I mean, hopefully they associate it with lots of things and lots of religions, but I don't know. Do you think Christianity's done a good job to claim the love brand?
Uh, it's uniquely obsessed with it. Yeah. I'm a much like the pursuit of happiness is associated with the United States of America because we wrote it into our Constitution. Um, yeah, I mean, it's not, Judaism didn't state that God is love, that sort of thing. But it rooted it in much as I would say all religions root all spiritual practices, 90, meaning all in the statistical, not the absolute sense, like 95 plus of all spiritual practices throughout human history have rooted it in some form of, even if this is blasphemous in Christianity to say this, like love God first and love people, sort of love your neighbor. Well, actually, not even love people because that's not universal at all. That's Christian. That's unique to Christianity. Is love your neighbor as yourself, and your neighbor is not everybody. You're not neighbors with everybody. I mean, that's just like literally a fact. So I've got like whatever. I've got a small number of neighbors in my neighborhood. Um, so yes, love certainly is. But then likewise, this is the fascinating thing. Maybe as getting to love, maybe as a gateway to spiritual, or like whatever spiritual means, um, is what I can't find any examples of outside of the colonial religion, the like New Age thing, is every concept seems to have been lifted from a source in which things are mediated by uh, access of external, and that there are preset boundaries, meaning you're reducing or removing the flexibility problem, which I'm sure you're well aware of if you have an individual practice, which is, well, wait, how do I know what boundaries exist that aren't just the boundaries I feel like imposing on myself? Meaning, without a Ten Commandments, let's say, or without a constitution, can't you just change? I mean, ultimately, can't you just change it anytime you want? Ultimately, so then there really is no boundary, which is it's the sort of substitution of self as God, which none of the traditions, mindfulness, meditation, yoga, prayer, concepts of love ahead of time were taken from. So then, like love in the Bible or in Christianity, love of neighbor, love of people who aren't yourself, is rooted in rebuke. The first time it's mentioned in the Old Testament is, yeah, you shall surely rebuke your brother and not bear sin because of him. So you're responsible to rebuke people when they do the wrong thing. Uh, Love your neighbor as yourself, it says. You shall not take vengeance. You're supposed to rebuke them, not take vengeance. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's the first time it's mentioned. So love is actually built in rebuke, not affirmation, which I think is contrary to the, I would assume, I could be wrong, to the manner of love that you might be speaking of within the spiritual or the religious tradition that you're talking about. But am I perceiving that inaccurately?
I'm not sure on that last part.
Mm.
Love is rooted in or emerged from rebuke.
Yes.
So, like loving people who aren't yourself, or like who aren't like yourself.
Loving people who aren't you is built in rebuke. So if you love anyone, it's first and foremost rooted in essentially helping destroy anything that's destroying them,
Hmm.
which would be built specifically here on them following impulses, their own internal compass towards paths of destruction. Essentially, would probably be like a broad way to describe. I'm trying to make it more broad than Christianity and speak
Yeah.
to it to the universal because that's how Buddhism functions, right? It's a series of snippings, right? Cutting off every single attachment whatsoever, including like Buddhism would reject the New Age because it's a, what do they call it? It's like a form of quote unquote spiritual attachment. Um, so you're
Hmm.
there to clip that off. Uh, Islam would be even stronger that like you have to be a Muslim to even engage these things um, at all, right? Um, so yeah, I was trying to say in a universal sense that, and I'm saying since that's the root of it, love. If you speak love in a Christian context, I'm trying to say it might be a complete again, just like, or even in a religious or spiritual context, broadly speaking, it might be very different from what love might mean in your religion's context.
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying? From the most fundamental, like point A level, or even pre-point A level.
Yeah, the simplest way I've come to think about love is absolute appreciation. There's this journey of awareness. I think you and I, this whole show is about awareness. Like, hey, can we
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
really look at things through new lenses? Can we show up and spar with each other? And I think you're more comfortable with that than I am, but I appreciate it. Um, uh, and then there's acceptance. It's like goes from awareness to maybe acceptance in a lot of traditions. But this idea of and this would I think align with ideas like that I hear Christians say a lot. It's like, well, it's God's will, or trust God, or uh, I'm paraphrasing, I'm sure, but especially when something bad happens, right? Like, well, um, this idea that yeah, I don't know, I don't find myself saying everything happens for a reason, or that it was sort of. I don't necessarily like the idea of imagining some deity sitting there, doling out decisions, but the idea that we live in a system that is balanced and learning to it's humbling to consider that outside of ourselves, however we get there. And so I do want to say, um, I wanted to kind of dig in a bit and sort of make sure I understood where you were coming from.
Yeah.
But I do agree with you. Based on these dictionary definitions, no. Like you could we have squabbled about some of the deeper definition, but at the surface, yeah, I the word religion is not just immediately attached to the major religions or to specific
Yeah.
practices or a book or whatever or a building.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah. Yeah.
so no, you've opened my eyes.
Yeah.
Maybe
What?
I am religious.
I mean, it's not, literally by based on everything you're saying, you are describing a religious point of view in that something exists in a transcendent reality, partially accessible, requiring some degree of attention in order to even to recognize slash access. I mean, like it's all the religious things. And then because you go to and you actually have like also teachers and buildings that you go to and things that you read. So then I mean, for you personally or whatever, which is, again, it was something you said you'd said in the past, and you don't really say it. I think that they're unnecessarily adversarial because you're describing the same thing. Like there is no spiritual without religious. And then, but of course, but this is really only defining religious. We haven't actually defined what in the world spiritual means. Um,
Well, let's go there, and maybe that'll help us
yeah,
understand,
yeah,
just at
like
least speculatively, like, well, why are people
yeah,
so
yeah,
adamant about drawing this
what's,
distinction?
yeah, yeah,
Well, so for me, spirituality is about connection, and to me, it's there are four degrees of connection. It's
yeah,
self, other people, the earth. I think connecting to the earth is a really spiritual act, and generally, capital S, spirit.
mm,
Um, I think, which is interchangeable for God or lots of names for deities. That's probably the new agey way of saying God is to say spirit.
yeah,
And I don't have a problem with God. And in fact, in my dialogue techniques, the biggest entity I've ever talked to is indeed Allah. Um, and I don't, that was surprising because I don't know much about Allah. It would be almost probably insulting, in fact, to Muslims given who I am and where I came from and what little I know. And yet, nevertheless, that's the conversation I found myself having. So it's like, interesting. Um,
so within your, so then, so then entities and Allah are not separate though in any way. Sort of within your grounding of spirituality or spiritual, because then again, in the definition of spiritual, just broadly, that involves outside something,
yeah.
meaning,
So that's that fourth. You could say maybe Earth, and that's obviously there's certain traditions that are very earth bound in their, religious beliefs. But that fourth category, I think, is the most probably close, yeah, the easiest to associate with what I
yeah,
think of
yeah, yeah,
religion, God,
yeah, yeah.
deity, greater force. Hey, we're Star
But
Wars fans. The Force, the greatest
yeah.
deity of all.
So then, what is spiritual? Because the earth is material, other people are material, right? Because the number one definition of spiritual is having the nature of spirit, not material, supernatural. So the earth has material, so it can't be spiritual in and of itself because it's material. We have material, other people have material. So it's not just other people, right? It would have to be some, or is it, or I'm saying, or is it a different definition entirely? Meaning it's that which is within the earth that is not material, that which in other people which is not material.
Well,
Because
there's
then the spirit,
energy. I mean, there's energy, there's animus running through all of it. So,
but non-measurable. You say that would be not, but it would have to be non-measurable. Meaning we can measure our electrochemical energy, hormonal energy, pheromonal energy, et cetera, et cetera. Like in the biblical sense, soul means, as near as I can tell, material energy. Meaning you might not be able to see it, but it is all recordable through modern phenomena. There's nothing about the soul that is unrecordable. The soul is just the animating force that animates the body. So you could just put on all your, or think of it like in a futuristic way, right? You've got your awesome special glasses and you flick it over there and it's thermal, you flick it over there and it's pheromonal, you flick it over here and it's electrochemical, whatever. All of that is, anything that keeps us alive is soul. It's like our battery. Soul doesn't exist outside a body. Your body's dead, your soul's gone. When your body comes back, your soul is in it, that sort of thing. So, but that's soul, which is a completely different concept than spirit. Spirit is immaterial. Again, at least through all spiritual traditions, whatever 95 plus. But I'm saying in your spiritual tradition, or within the context of saying spiritual, not religious, is spiritual not that? Is spiritual something other than that which is immaterial?
To me, it's about the relationship,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the relationship. It's the we could say it's the lens or the foundation or the means by which I hold relationship at all four of those, layers. Most people, I'm guessing, would focus more on the fourth, spirit, my relationship with spirit, my relationship with God.
I
And
think
yet,
a
to
lot of
me,
people would focus on the others. They just wouldn't. Like, for example, the third definition of spiritual is not concerned with material or worldly things. So that would mean myself, other people, and the earth are all secondary to that which is purely immaterial. But then, in any animistic or referential, pre-referential sense, that would be the immaterial force that permeates humanity, me and others, and creation, animals, blah blah blah, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, or even objects in a lot of animistic philosophies or religions. So is that true though? I mean, like, or like is that the means of reference that you're talking about? So like when you shake someone's hand, the handshake is not spiritual in this sense, right?
but my
But
connection to that person can be.
could be if they had spirit in them, right? If you or they had spirit in them, right? Which is rejected, which again is like sort of universally rejected. So it can't be, it's not like Baha'i where it's an overlap because all the religions that are assembled to assess commonality, exclusivity is also is a universal, meaning we're right, they're not right. So you can't just
Right.
not have exclusivity, and you can't just like chuck that out if you're collating universals. And then so, meaning in Christianity, for example, or let's just use Sufi Islam, right? In Islam, two Muslims shaking hands in honor of Allah could be a spiritual act. Two non-Muslims shaking hands, mentioning the name of Allah, would be non-spiritual and blasphemous. It's the same visual act. It's the same act encompassed. But then I'm trying to ascertain, like, I have the sense of there's no division. There's no non-spiritual for humans, right? Meaning like there's a spiritual element somewhere, some within, some with air, in that, let's say, handshake or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, that's how I see it. The spirit is there. It's, I
Okay.
mean, it's funny. I don't mean to be glib, but it's like I have been watching a lot of Star Wars lately, and it often feels like the Force, you know? It's like, well, okay, that's where that. But you probably know more than I do about where Lucas came up with that, and I bet it
What?
came from religious
Right.
ideas.
Well, but not and only some people have access to the Force. A
Well,
lot of
what's
people.
funny, we're in episode 8 where I remember we had that whole conversation. It was like, oh, those kids, those little kids,
Well,
like,
that's what I'm saying. They have not all the kids. One kid does. Most kids don't. So then that, for example, there's a great Force is a great example. The Force exists outside of people. Some people have access to it. Some people are Force sensitive and able to relate to the Force. The vast majority of people have no interaction with the Force. They are not Force. The Force influences them, can cause all sorts of chaos around them, but they have no access to the Force. They are not Force sensitive people. They don't have the midichlorians, right?
right. And
So,
even the
so
Jedi end up abusing it and going around doing mind
right,
control,
right, right.
you know?
So, because if there's no boundaries other than yourself, then what? This, I mean, I think that's what.
Oh, so I did want to
See,
speak to that. So
yeah,
I
yeah, yeah,
appreciate that uh, moral codes are woven in to different. Let's go back to the major religions.
yeah.
I think as they become less major, those probably become a lot less consistent, and so that could be a virtue of the major
I don't,
religions.
I don't.
But,
Well, but don't all. Well, I don't think. I don't know though. I just mean
well,
I
well,
don't know.
at least just
Go
at
ahead.
the level of language, like just they're not literally stated the same. Like the Ten Commandments don't exactly show up, but the ideas I hope are there because they're good ones. They're just good moral
Yeah,
values. We
let's
could talk.
let's not murder people. Yeah,
Right. Hey, can we all agree on that one? Well, yeah, we sort of have as a society.
yeah.
but that's where I think in this spiritual realm, this individualistic religion realm,
Yeah,
I guess we could say, after this conversation, uh, that's where we have to depend on values. Like, so in the systems I've developed, use, and maybe that shows up in organizations, businesses, mutual aid networks, there's going to be a system of values that ties that together, which in many ways is the same thing. It's a moral code of conduct. It's like, here's how we behave here. Here's how we expect to behave. And here's something we can come back to when we're out of accountability and say, hey, look, we all agreed to do it this way or adhere to this value. So I think those are like separated. That's a pretty interesting concept that this with if there's spirituality that's not connected to in the way of having a specific book or guidelines within a group or community, there is potentially a gap there. And I would say that's a
yeah,
problem. But I'd say that has to
yeah.
be filled by something. And I usually fill it with values.
Right. But values have no reference in that conceit. They're just a collective agreement.
Yes.
They have no they're not virtue in the classic sense. So that's why I probably use value, because virtue pre-exists human beings discovering it. You know what I mean? It's
Mm.
what is it? Apodictic. Like it exists prior to reasoning. Um, and people try to discover what are our universals by looking at, of course, moral traditions and being like, what recurs, meaning what can we most accurately assess are the most resolute, and murder isn't on there, funnily enough, because whatever, murder has been allowed in sort of many traditions or whatever, but there are some that are question though about if all creatures within the system you're talking about are spiritual in nature. Does that make is that kind of the basis by which you're not supposed to cause harm necessarily to other entities that are suffuse with what the corollary for divine presence, like spirit or whatever?
I think the hope, and this goes back to love, the hope would be that if you're connected to spirit and operating from that depth, that I don't know, the natural principles of morality would guide you. But I think we've proven over the
Yeah.
last
Well,
many
yeah.
thousand years that humans aren't great at
Yeah.
just, winging it on that one.
Yeah.
So,
Or that nature has no morality. I mean, if you're going to be Werner Herzog about it, there's no such thing as natural. I mean, people invoke it like natural law, but you're like, watch nature, dude.
well, that's
Things
what
are,
I was saying earlier about just
yeah.
it's in balance, right? It's just like the system we're
Or it's
so that
it's in imbalance actually, meaning like that's the consensus of all spiritual traditions. The world we live in is in imbalance. When people say it's God's will, they're not saying it's good. You know what I mean? Meaning like it's God's will that the world is entropic. All things tend towards entropy. We know this from science as well as religion. It's not headed into balance. It's literally in a over preponderance of decay or chaos. It's not like in the Force or the more expanded universe of the Star Wars, right? That the dark and the light are always kind of fighting, but it's trying to maintain balance between darkness and light. That is not what spiritual traditions overwhelmingly say. They actually say that like active resistance against the nature of self and man and humanity and sequence is required because all things tend towards attachment, towards sin, towards what you know what I mean, whatever terminology. The dark side is way more powerful than the light side of the force.
all
So
right.
anyways,
Well, I
yeah,
thought this
go
would
ahead.
be a quick discussion, but I guess it's been going on for thousands of years, so that was silly. But I do need to
Yeah.
run. So how about we go
Okay.
part two?
Yeah. Let's try to find the where the balance may be.
All right. Love you.
Love you.